They called it the workhorse of the Wehrmacht, the German Sd.Kfz 7 heavy tractor, a machine that had towed 88mm flak guns across Europe and hauled supplies through Russian mud. American soldiers had seen these massive half-tracks abandoned on roadsides, disabled in combat or captured intact as the German war machine crumbled. But they had never actually driven one. Not really. Not until the spring of 1945, when GI crews finally climbed into the driver's seats of these captured German tractors and fired up their Maybach engines. They expected German engineering excellence. They expected power and reliability. What they discovered instead would fundamentally change how American military planners understood the hidden weaknesses that had helped doom the Third Reich. Weaknesses that went far beyond tactics or training or even industrial capacity. Sometimes, the most revealing truths about an enemy's collapse are found not in grand strategic decisions, but in the mundane details of how much fuel a truck burns per mile. By late 1944, the tide of war had turned decisively against Germany. American, British, and Canadian forces had broken out of Normandy and were racing across France toward the German border. Behind them, supply officers worked frantically to keep fuel, ammunition, spare parts flowing to the rapidly advancing armies. It was in this logistical chaos that the Sd.Kfz 7 became a point of fascination. Engineers and mechanics gathered around these captured tractors, their massive engines and intricate transmissions a testament to German ambition. But also, as the GIs were about to learn, a silent indicator of inefficiency. Climbing into the cab, hands brushing against cold, heavy levers, the GIs noticed the Maybach engine hummed smoothly. The suspension handled the uneven terrain surprisingly well. But when the first convoy test began, a shocking reality emerged. This mechanical marvel drank fuel at a rate that made even the familiar 3 half-tracks look economical. Every mile across mud, cobblestones, or shattered roads was a testament to both the tractor's strength and its Achilles heel. The Sd.Kfz 7 was no ordinary vehicle. To the untrained eye, it looked like a massive truck with tracks at the back, a curious hybrid between a half-track and a conventional tractor. But for the Germans, it was a backbone of their mechanized artillery. American GIs, used to the nimble M3 half-tracks, immediately noticed the difference. The Sd.Kfz 7 was larger, heavier, and far more complex. Its 140 horsepower Maybach HL62 engine promised strength. But strength came at a cost, especially fuel. On the first test run, the Americans tried to tow a captured 88mm flak gun across a muddy French field. The engine roared to life, vibrating through the cab and sending a shiver down the spine of the young drivers. The half-track moved steadily, the massive suspension absorbing the uneven terrain with surprising grace. But then came the first glaring issue: fuel consumption. Every mile consumed gallons and gallons of precious gasoline. Supply officers, used to calculating the logistics of M3 convoys, watched in disbelief as the fuel gauges plummeted. The Sd.Kfz 7 was powerful, yes, but voracious. The GIs began to measure efficiency. How far could it travel before running dry? How long would it take to refuel under combat conditions? Each answer highlighted a simple truth: the Germans had designed a workhorse, but one that demanded an almost impossible logistical tale to sustain it in extended operations. Mechanically, the half-track was brilliant. The torsion bar suspension allowed it to glide over obstacles that would have stalled a standard truck. The engine, robust and reliable, could continue working even under stress and minimal maintenance. Yet every advantage came with a compromise. The sheer size of the Sd.Kfz 7 made it slower and less maneuverable than American vehicles. Its maintenance required specialized knowledge. Field repairs were more complicated than with the M3 half-track. During one particularly grueling test, a GI driver muttered under his breath, "It's like driving a tank with the appetite of a small city." Others laughed nervously, knowing that fuel shortages could render such a marvel useless in an actual combat scenario. As the day wore on, the soldiers compared notes. The Sd.Kfz 7 was impressive, a testament to German engineering, but impractical in the long term. Its enormous fuel consumption, maintenance requirements, and slow pace made it a logistical burden. And here's the real eye-opener for the Americans. The Germans had poured ingenuity into building a machine that could perform miracles, yet they had failed to prioritize efficiency. In the end, raw power without practicality would not win the war. Before we move forward, a quick question for you, the viewer. If you were behind the wheel of this German half-track, could you manage its fuel and still keep up with advancing troops? Drop your answer in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible WWII stories like this. You won't want to miss what comes next when the GIs put this tractor through its paces. By the time the Americans had unloaded the Sd.Kfz-7 from the captured convoy, curiosity had turned into a full-blown fascination. GIs clustered around the massive vehicle, taking in every detail. The half-track's front wheels were wide and sturdy, designed to handle European mud and rough terrain. The rear tracks were reinforced and tensioned with precision, a marvel for towing artillery. To the casual observer, it was a simple tractor. But for those who had spent months in the field relying on M3 half-tracks, every bolt, lever, and engine component told a story. The first test run across a cleared French road offered a sense of awe. The Sd.Kfz-7 moved with authority, its engine growling like a caged beast released. American drivers noted how smoothly it handled, how steady the ride felt even when loaded with heavy artillery. The Maybach engine was strong, capable of towing what seemed like impossible weights with ease. But as the convoy ventured further into rough terrain, reality began to set in. The tractor was a prodigy of engineering, but it drank fuel with alarming appetite. While M3 half-tracks could cover miles with a moderate tank of gasoline, the Sd.Kfz-7 seemed to burn endlessly. Every mile consumed a gallon or more, and fuel gauges plummeted faster than expected. Soldiers began to tally numbers. Each test run was documented meticulously. Distance traveled, fuel consumed, engine performance, and terrain navigated. The comparisons were stark. The Sd.Kfz-7 offered unmatched towing capacity, but at the cost of efficiency. Mechanics scrambled to assess maintenance needs. Its transmission and engine were robust, but required careful handling. A misstep could jam gears or overheat the engine. The vehicle demanded discipline, something Allied forces learned to value in their own M3 half-tracks, which, while less powerful, were far easier to repair and operate under battlefield conditions. By the second day, the GIs had conducted simulated artillery maneuvers. They attached a captured 88mm gun and tested towing over hills and ditches. The Sd.Kfz-7 performed admirably, climbing steep inclines and powering through mud. Yet fuel consumption soared, and drivers began to understand why German logistics had struggled late in the war. Tanks, half-tracks, and tractors consumed resources faster than the factories could replace them, particularly as Allied bombing campaigns crippled supply lines. The Americans. Observations began to reveal a larger picture. German vehicles were marvels of engineering, but their brilliance was often paired with impractical demands. Strength came at a cost, and in a fast-moving theater of war, that cost could become crippling. Soldiers shared stories from the field. One GI joked that the Sd.Kfz-7 ate fuel like a schnitzel eats gravy, while another muttered about needing a small convoy just to keep it running. Laughter mingled with awe, a recognition of how far the German war machine had come, and how its brilliance could not compensate for logistical reality. By the end of the day, the Sd.Kfz-7 had earned a reputation mechanically superior, awe-inspiring but dangerously inefficient. American planners began to note lessons that would influence vehicle design, maintenance, and tactical thinking in the months to come. After days of observation and field tests, the GIs decided it was time to push the Sd.Kfz-7 to its limits. They loaded the tractor with a fully equipped 88mm flak gun, ammunition, crates, and a few soldiers for ballast. The American drivers had become familiar with its controls, the heavy clutch, the responsive steering, and the growl of the Maybach engine. But nothing could prepare them for the reality of maneuvering this massive half-track through uneven terrain in shell-pocked fields. As the convoy moved forward, the first lesson became painfully clear. The Sd.Kfz was slow. On open roads, it could hold a steady pace, but cross-country travel revealed its weaknesses. Muddy slopes required careful throttle control. Too much, and the wheels would spin uselessly, wasting fuel. Too little, and the vehicle would stall, leaving the artillery guns stranded at a critical moment. American engineers observed closely, jotting down notes on the vehicle's performance. They calculated fuel consumption under different loads and terrains. Every hill climbed, every ditch crossed, highlighted the trade-off the Germans had made, a vehicle designed for power, endurance, and towing capacity, but with voracious fuel requirements that could cripple operations if supply lines faltered. Despite its inefficiencies, the Sd.Kfz remained impressive. Its suspension system absorbed shocks with remarkable stability. The rear tracks powered the vehicle over obstacles that would have grounded lighter half-tracks. The Maybach engine ran smoothly even when pushed to extremes. But the Americans began to notice another hidden cost: maintenance. Minor issues required specialized tools and knowledge. Loose bolts, clogged air filters, or minor leaks could turn a mechanical marvel into a stationary pile of metal. Allied crews compared these challenges to their own M3 half-tracks, which could be repaired on the spot with minimal tools. It became increasingly clear: German engineering prioritized complexity and performance over practicality. As the day wore on, the soldiers experimented with towing multiple loads, simulating real combat scenarios. They marveled at the tractor's strength, but grimaced at the gallons of fuel disappearing from the tanks with each mile. The Sd.Kfz could move massive guns and equipment, but sustaining such operations over long distances required a logistic tale that Germany simply could no longer provide. At this point, the Americans began to grasp a larger truth. The enemy's reliance on these powerful but inefficient vehicles revealed cracks in their operational strategy. Germany had created machines that were formidable in theory, but vulnerable in practice. A tactical victory could not overcome the logistical nightmare of keeping such vehicles supplied in the waning months of the war. By the evening, the G is gathered around the Sd.Kfz, reflecting on what they had learned. The tractor was a symbol of German ambition, technical skill, and flawed prioritization. It demonstrated that even the most powerful machines could be rendered ineffective without careful planning and sustainable resources. Before we continue, here's a question for you, viewer. Could you manage a vehicle like this under battlefield conditions, balancing fuel, maintenance, and heavy loads? Drop your answer in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more amazing WWII discoveries. You won't want to miss what happens when the GIs take this tractor into full operational tests. The next morning, the Gs were determined to put the Sd.Kfz through a full operational trial. This time, they planned a realistic simulation, towing a captured 88mm gun across rugged terrain, navigating forest paths, river crossings, and shattered roadways, exactly the conditions German crews had faced throughout the war. Every soldier knew this was not just a test of engineering, but a test of endurance, patience, and logistics. The half-track roared to life. Its Maybach engine growled like a predator waking in the dawn light. The Americans carefully guided it forward, the rear tracks churning through mud and rubble. At first, it felt almost effortless. The Sd.Kfz moved with surprising authority, climbing over debris and dragging the heavy artillery as if it were nothing. But as the hours passed, a new reality became undeniable. Fuel consumption skyrocketed. Each mile drained tanks faster than anyone had anticipated. Supply sergeants watched the numbers with disbelief, calculating that a prolonged operation would require multiple fuel trucks to sustain the tractor alone. Mechanical quirks also began to surface. Minor vibrations became jolts, and small leaks appeared under pressure. The vehicle demanded constant attention, tightening bolts, monitoring engine temperatures, and adjusting track tension. One misstep, one forgotten inspection, could render the machine useless in minutes. Despite these challenges, the Sd.Kfz-7 continued to perform admirably. The suspension soaked up rough terrain. The engine powered through inclines and soft ground with relentless force. For towing artillery or moving heavy loads, it was unmatched. If you could afford the fuel and maintenance demands, the Americans began comparing it with their M3 half-tracks. While the M3 South were smaller and less powerful, they consumed far less fuel, required simpler maintenance, and could be operated by a crew with minimal mechanical expertise. In contrast, the German half-track demanded a full understanding of its complex systems and a steady supply of gasoline. Luxuries Germany could no longer reliably provide in 1945. As the convoy reached a river crossing, the true scale of the Sd.Kfz-7's strengths and weaknesses became clear. It could power through the water and haul the gun to safety, but each maneuver consumed fuel at a staggering rate. The Americans realized that while German engineering had produced a vehicle of immense capability, its practicality in a prolonged campaign was limited. By the end of the day, the GIs had drawn a stark conclusion. The Sd.Kfz-7 was a testament to German ingenuity, a machine capable of extraordinary feats, but it was also a machine that demanded so much support that it became vulnerable to logistical failure. In the end, raw power alone could not sustain the German war effort. Before moving on, a quick reflection. Imagine being a supply officer responsible for keeping one of these beasts running. Could you manage the fuel and repairs under real combat conditions? Think about it. Drop your answer in the comments. And remember to subscribe to the channel to follow the full story of the GIS and the captured German half-track. The next phase of testing began with a bold idea. Take the Sd.Kfz-7 into a simulated battlefield scenario. The GH wanted to understand not just how the vehicle performed in isolation, but how it would function under combat conditions. They set up mock supply runs, artillery towing missions, maneuver exercises across open fields, forested areas, and damaged roadways. Soldiers from various units rotated in to drive, maintain, and document the results. At first, the half-track's performance was uninspiring. The Maybach engine provided a smooth, commanding force, powering the vehicle across obstacles that would have slowed or disabled lighter half-tracks, even with a fully loaded 88mm gun attached. The Sd.Kfz-7 handled the terrain with surprising ease, its tracks biting into mud and soft soil without losing momentum. But as operations continued, the limitations became painfully apparent. Fuel tanks drained faster than anyone anticipated, creating a need for constant refueling. Every mile traveled demanded careful planning to avoid leaving the vehicle stranded mid-mission. Soldiers began to understand why German commanders had struggled to maintain supply lines in the final months of the war. The tractor was brilliant, but only when fuel and maintenance were abundant. Resources that were increasingly scarce. Mechanical maintenance was another challenge. Every mission revealed small issues: loose bolts, worn track links, and engine heat spikes. Mechanics had to work constantly to keep the vehicle operational, performing checks and adjustments that would have been impossible during real combat under enemy fire. The American M3 half-tracks, while less capable in raw towing power, proved far more reliable for sustained operations. Despite the challenges, the Sd.Kfz-7's power was undeniable. In one test, the half-track successfully dragged 2 artillery pieces across a muddy ravine and up a steep incline, a task that would have required multiple M3s or an entire convoy. The GS were impressed, but the effort came at a cost. Fuel consumption skyrocketed, and minor mechanical problems required immediate attention to avoid catastrophic failure. The tactical lessons were clear. German vehicles like the Sd.Kfz-7 were marvels of engineering, but their effectiveness relied heavily on logistics. In a real battlefield scenario, fuel shortages, mechanical failures, and the need for skilled operators would have limited their operational usefulness. It was a brilliant design constrained by practical realities. It's a microcosm of the challenges that had plagued Germany in the late stages of the war. By the end of the day, the Americans gathered to debrief. They had learned that raw power and towing capacity could not compensate for logistical vulnerabilities. The Sd.Kfz-7 was impressive, but it was also a reminder that no matter how advanced the engineering, a machine's battlefield value depended on the resources needed to keep it running as the sun set. One of the GIs turned to the group, grinning through the exhaustion. This thing could win a war if someone else fed it fuel every day. Laughter rippled through the group, but beneath it was a sober acknowledgement of a vital lesson. Understanding an enemy's machines could reveal as much about their strategic weaknesses as about their technological prowess. After several days of testing, the GIs decided it was time to put the Sd.Kfz-7 through a full operational exercise. Simulating the conditions of a real battlefield, they assembled a convoy. Loading the tractor with a fully equipped 88mm flak gun, ammunition crates, and several soldiers acting as mock infantry support, the goal was to replicate a scenario similar to what German crews had faced in France and the Ardennes. Every soldier knew this wasn't just about driving a vehicle. It was a lesson in logistics, endurance, and understanding enemy capabilities. The half-track roared to life, its Maybach engine growling with authority. As it moved forward, the GIs were struck by the sheer power of the machine. It tackled soft mud, uneven terrain, and debris-strewn paths with impressive stability. The rear tracks dug in, propelling the vehicle through conditions that would have slowed other half-tracks to a crawl. However, the exercise quickly exposed the harsh realities of operating such a vehicle. Fuel consumption was alarmingly high. Every mile across rough terrain consumed gallons of gasoline, and even with careful throttle management, the Sd.Kfz-7 could not cover long distances without refueling. Supply officers noted that in a prolonged operation, keeping these machines fueled would have required a significant logistical effort. Something Germany was already struggling with in 1945, mechanical issues also became apparent. Small vibrations turned into noticeable shakes, bolts loosened under the stress of repeated maneuvers, and the engine required constant monitoring. Unlike the American M3 half-tracks, which could be repaired quickly by almost any soldier, the Sd.Kfz-7 demanded skilled mechanics and specialized tools. The Americans realized that German engineering had sacrificed simplicity and practicality for raw power and towing capacity. Despite these challenges, the half-track performed astonishingly. It towed artillery over difficult terrain, crossed rivers, and navigated obstacles that would have halted lesser vehicles. But each achievement came at a cost: fuel consumption, constant maintenance, and the physical effort of coordinating such a massive machine. The GIs began to understand the broader strategic implications. German forces had relied on these vehicles to move heavy artillery and supplies. Their high operational demands made them vulnerable. A single fuel shortage or mechanical failure could halt an entire operation, leaving guns stranded and soldiers exposed. It was a brilliant machine in theory, but in practice, it revealed the limits of German logistical capacity in the final months of the war. As the day ended, the Americans gathered around the Sd.Kfz-7, reflecting on what they had learned. The vehicle was a symbol of German engineering excellence, but also of strategic overreach. Its power could not compensate for the limitations imposed by fuel dependency and maintenance complexity. At this point, the GIs realized that understanding the enemy's machines offered insights far beyond their technical specifications. It revealed weaknesses in planning, production, and operational strategy. They could now see why Germany's logistical system had collapsed and how Allied forces could exploit these vulnerabilities in the final push toward victory. Before we move on, here's a question for you, viewer. Could you handle such a machine under real battlefield conditions? Balancing fuel, maintenance, and artillery loads? Drop your answer in the comments. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for more in-depth WWII stories and exclusive battlefield insights. With several days of individual testing behind them, the GIs shifted focus to more complex tactical exercises. This phase was designed to evaluate how the Sd.Kfz-7 would perform under simulated combat conditions, including coordination with infantry, artillery deployment, and rapid repositioning across challenging terrain. Soldiers and mechanics worked together to map out obstacle courses that included muddy fields, forest clearings, rubble-strewn roads, and shallow river crossings. Each exercise was meant to mimic what German crews had faced during operations in Normandy, the Ardennes, and Eastern Europe. The half-track's performance remained impressive in many respects. The Maybach engine powered the vehicle forward with authority, while the tracked rear ensured traction in mud and soft soil. Heavy artillery could be towed over obstacles that would have slowed or stalled lighter vehicles. Observing the Sd.Kfz-7's capabilities, the GIs acknowledged the genius of German engineering. Its combination of power, mobility, and load-bearing capacity was exceptional. Yet, the limitations were impossible to ignore. Fuel consumption continued to be a critical issue. With tanks depleting faster than expected, maintenance demands were constant. Track tension needed adjustment. Engine temperatures had to be monitored, and small mechanical issues required immediate attention to prevent breakdowns. Each exercise highlighted that the Sd.Kfz-7, while capable, was operationally fragile in a resource-constrained environment. Coordination with infantry revealed additional insights. The Sd.Kfz-7 could deliver artillery quickly and reliably, but delays in refueling or maintenance would have slowed entire operations, forcing commanders to account for its vulnerability in strategic planning. Compared to the American M3 half-tracks, which could be operated with minimal preparation and fuel, the German tractor demanded a highly skilled crew and careful logistical oversight. By the end of the week, the GIS had accumulated enough data to draw broader conclusions about the Sd.Kfz-7's battlefield impact. While its raw power was undeniable, it was a vehicle that only excelled under ideal conditions. Any disruption to supply lines, mechanical failures, or inexperienced operators could neutralize its advantages. In many ways, the Sd.Kfz-7 mirrored the German war effort itself, technically brilliant, yet over-engineered and increasingly unsustainable as resources dwindled. The final exercises included long-distance towing missions across muddy fields, river fording drills, and simulated rapid redeployment of artillery pieces. Each mission reinforced the same lesson. The Sd.Kfz-7 could perform feats that few Allied vehicles could match, but only at the cost of fuel maintenance and manpower. As the sun set over the testing grounds, the soldiers gathered for a debrief. They reflected on how the Sd.Kfz-7 had been a cornerstone of German artillery operations, and how understanding its strengths and weaknesses offered invaluable lessons. Observing the vehicle in action revealed not just the capabilities of German engineering, but the logistical and operational vulnerabilities that had contributed to the Third Reich's collapse. In the end, the Sd.Kfz-7 was more than a machine. It was a lens through which the GIs could understand the challenges of sustaining a technologically advanced, yet resource-hungry, military force during a total war. By now, the GIs had spent weeks testing, observing, and operating the Sd.Kfz-7 under a variety of conditions. They understood its raw power, its mechanical quirks, and its enormous logistical demands. But the final phase of testing aimed to simulate a full-scale operational deployment, essentially a miniature battle to assess how the vehicle would function when pressed to the limits of endurance. The Americans organized a large-scale exercise that included multiple half-tracks, towed artillery, infantry squads, and supply convoys. The Sd.Kfz-7 South were loaded with maximum payloads, carrying 88mm guns, ammunition, and essential supplies. Crews were instructed to navigate rough terrain, cross streams, and maneuver through dense forest areas while maintaining operational speed. The goal was simple: measure performance under prolonged, realistic conditions. The exercise began smoothly. The Sd.Kfz-7 South powered across soft fields, towed heavy artillery with relative ease, and maintained surprising speed over uneven terrain. Observers noted the efficiency of the rear track system, which provided traction in mud, sand, and even lightly frozen ground. For moments at a time, it seemed as though the German engineering legend had been justified. However, as the exercise continued, vulnerabilities emerged quickly. Fuel consumption exceeded all projections. Despite careful planning, crews had to ration gasoline and adjust driving strategies to avoid being stranded mid-mission. Mechanics worked tirelessly to maintain operational readiness, constantly adjusting track tension, checking engine temperature, and replacing worn components. Each minor mechanical hiccup slowed the convoy, highlighting the extreme dependency on skilled maintenance, a luxury the Wehrmacht had increasingly lacked in late 1944 and 1945. Coordination with infantry revealed further challenges. While the Sd.Kfz-7 could rapidly reposition artillery, any delay due to fuel or mechanical issues created cascading problems, forcing infantry units to wait for artillery support or adapt to slower M3 half-tracks. The exercise demonstrated that German commanders faced a constant tension between the vehicle's raw capabilities and its operational limitations. In analyzing these exercises, the GIs drew key strategic lessons. The Sd.Kfz-7's exceptional towing capacity and power were undeniable. Yet without abundant fuel, skilled operators, and ongoing maintenance, its advantages could vanish instantly. The tractor was a machine built for performance under ideal conditions, but it was inherently fragile in extended campaigns, a reflection of Germany's overextended logistical network during the final year of the war. By the end of the day, soldiers gathered to discuss the results. The Sd.Kfz-7 could have dominated smaller-scale engagements or executed rapid artillery deployments, but only with significant support. It was a brilliant machine, yes, but its brilliance depended on a system that was already failing. For the GIS, the exercise had confirmed an essential truth. Understanding enemy machinery offered a window not just into engineering skill, but into strategic weakness. As one American officer summed up the lessons learned, this thing could do wonders, but only if someone else keeps it fed and fixed. That's where the war was lost. The Sd.Kfz-7 had proved itself powerful, but also fragile, a microcosm of the German war effort in its final months. After weeks of testing, the GIs finally brought their experiments to a close. They had driven, towed, and maintained the Sd.Kfz-7 under nearly every imaginable condition. They had seen its strengths: immense towing power, stability over rough terrain, and an ability to carry artillery where other vehicles would falter. Yet, they had also seen its weaknesses: voracious fuel consumption, constant maintenance demands, and a reliance on highly skilled operators. The lessons were clear. The Sd.Kfz-7 was a brilliant machine, a marvel of German engineering, but it was not a miracle. In a prolonged conflict where supply lines were stretched thin, fuel scarce, and mechanics overworked, the tractor's advantages could quickly become liabilities. Each exercise reinforced a larger truth about the German war effort. Technical brilliance alone could not compensate for strategic overreach and resource shortages. For the American soldiers, the experience went beyond mechanics. It offered a window into the logistical and operational vulnerabilities that had contributed to the Wehrmacht's collapse. Every mile driven, every engine adjusted, and every artillery piece towed reminded them that even the most powerful vehicles required a network of support to function effectively. Without it, even the strongest machine could be rendered useless. As the Sd.Kfz-7 South were returned to storage, the GIs reflected on the broader implications. Understanding enemy machinery wasn't just about technical curiosity. It was about strategy, insight, and anticipating weaknesses. The captured tractors had told a story of German ingenuity, but also of overstretched resources, and the critical role of logistics in modern warfare. In the end, the Sd.Kfz-7 was more than a vehicle. It was a lesson in operational reality, a symbol of engineering excellence, tempered by practical limitations, and a reminder that victory in war is won not only by machines, but by the systems and people that sustain them.